He was supposed to make it to trial. That's the part that keeps echoing. Not loudly, not dramatically, just sitting there unresolved. A man in custody. Charges filed. Court dates pending. A justice system designed, at least on paper, to move slowly and deliberately toward answers. And yet, before any of that could happen, Nick Reiner was dead. But before we continue, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Beaten to death by other inmates. That is the confirmation now coming from the highest levels of law enforcement. Not a rumor, not a leak, not speculation circulating online. A confirmation that lands with a kind of quiet finality, the kind that doesn't explode, but instead settles heavily, forcing everyone to reconsider what they thought they knew. Because once the accused is gone, the story changes. Permanently. Let me ask you something right at the start, and I want you to sit with it, not answer it quickly. What happens to the truth when the person accused of a crime never gets the chance to speak? This case was already disturbing before today. Two elderly parents, Reiner, 78, and Michelle, 70, found stabbed to death inside their $13.5 million Brentwood estate. A home that, until that moment, represented security, success, and privacy. A home that also happened to include a guest house where their adult son lived. Their son, Nick Reiner, 32 years old, arrested that same night. Charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. And now he's gone. This isn't just about a violent crime anymore. It's about timing. It's about custody. It's about decisions made behind closed doors, in holding cells and intake offices, by people whose names most of us will never know. And it's about a justice system that may never get the chance to fully explain itself. What makes this moment especially unsettling is how fast everything unraveled. There was no drawn-out manhunt. No weeks of uncertainty. According to reports, the bodies were discovered on a Sunday. Nick was arrested that very night. The narrative seemed to snap into place almost immediately. Too neatly, some might say. The victim's daughter, Romy Reiner, reportedly told police something that now feels impossible to ignore. She allegedly warned them about a dangerous family member, someone she believed should be considered a suspect. That detail matters. Not because it proves anything, it doesn't, but because it tells us something about the internal dynamics of this family long before the headlines arrived. Think about what that implies. A warning from inside the family, before charges were filed, before the public knew anything at all. What did she see? What did she fear? And who was listening? Those questions were already hanging over this case like low clouds. Now, with Nick Reiner's death in custody, they feel heavier, more urgent, and strangely, harder to answer. Because whatever version of events Nick Reiner carried with him, denial, confession, explanation, contradiction, it died with him. And that creates a vacuum, one that speculation loves to rush into. But here's where we need to slow down. This is not the moment for conclusions. It's the moment for examination, for restraint, for asking the uncomfortable questions without pretending we already know the answers. Consider the sequence. Nick is arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The most serious accusation possible. He is placed into custody. At that point, the state assumes responsibility for his safety, not as a favor, as a duty. That duty does not disappear because someone is accused of something horrific. In fact, it becomes more important. And yet, according to the confirmation now released, Nick Reiner was beaten to death by fellow inmates. Not an accident, not a medical episode, not suicide, a beating. That detail alone raises immediate concerns. Where was he housed? Was he in protective custody? Was his identity known inside the facility? Were threats reported? Were warnings ignored? These are not abstract questions. These are standard protocols. The kind that exist precisely because cases like this are not rare. High-profile suspects are vulnerable. Emotionally, physically, psychologically. Everyone in the system knows that. So when something like this happens, the story cannot simply stop at an altercation occurred. Especially not when the suspect's death ensures there will be no trial, no testimony, no cross-examination, no opportunity to hear competing narratives under oath. And that absence matters, not just for Nick Reiner, but for the victims as well. Reiner and Michelle were brutally killed. That fact doesn't change. Their deaths deserve clarity. Their lives deserve more than a half-told story frozen in its most chaotic moment. Justice, in its purest form, depends on process. on transparency, on the slow, sometimes frustrating accumulation of facts. But now, that process has been severed, and we're left asking, was this inevitable, or was it preventable? That question becomes even more unsettling when you consider how quickly Nick Reiner's identity would have spread inside the jail system. High-profile cases don't stay quiet. Names circulate. Charges get talked about. Emotions run high. If you're an inmate accused of killing your own parents, elderly parents, that label alone carries weight. Inside a facility, that kind of accusation can be a death sentence if safeguards fail. Again, everyone knows this. Which brings us to the contradiction at the heart of this story. The justice system is designed to protect the process, not just punish outcomes. Yet here we are, confronting a moment where the process itself may have collapsed before it could even begin. And it forces us to ask something even more uncomfortable. When a suspect dies in custody, who is held accountable? Because accountability doesn't vanish just because the accused is no longer alive. Internal investigations will likely follow. Statements will be released. Protocols will be cited. Language will become careful, measured, legal. But beneath all of that, the fundamental issue remains unresolved. Nick Reiner was alive, in custody, and awaiting trial. And now he isn't. For some, that will feel like closure. For others, it will feel like something was stolen, not justice, but the chance to understand. And understanding matters, especially in cases that fracture families, communities, and public trust all at once. This isn't just a private tragedy that happened behind closed doors in a wealthy neighborhood. It's a public case now. A case with implications that stretch far beyond one family, one jail, or one prosecutor's office. Because if the system cannot guarantee safety for those it detains, even those accused of the worst crimes, then every case like this becomes a warning sign. And here's the part that's hardest to shake. Nick Reiner's death doesn't answer the questions surrounding his parents' murders. It multiplies them. It complicates timelines. It removes testimony. It forces investigators, prosecutors, and the public to rely on fragments instead of a full record. And it invites doubt, not necessarily about guilt or innocence, but about procedure, oversight, and responsibility. Was Nick Reiner ever meant to make it to trial? Was his placement appropriate? Were warning signs missed? Or was this a failure hiding in plain sight? Those questions are not accusations. They are necessities. Because when the accused dies in custody, silence becomes part of the case file. And silence has a way of lingering far longer than answers. What happened inside that jail didn't just end one life. It altered the trajectory of an entire investigation. And as we move forward, the focus shifts, not just to what happened inside the Reiner home that night, but to what happened after the handcuffs were applied, the cell door closed, and responsibility transferred from family to state. Because the night Reiner and Michelle were found dead was only the beginning. What came next? The decisions, the warnings, the failures, the moments no one was watching. Maybe the most disturbing part of this story. And once you see how quickly everything fell apart, it becomes impossible not to ask what else went wrong, long before anyone realized the consequences. End of introduction, complete. Say go when you want me to continue with chapter 1. Each time I type go, continue writing the next section of the script based on the outline. Continuation rules. Pick up immediately from the previous cliffhanger. Do not reintroduce or recap unnecessarily. Maintain narrative momentum. Length. Minimum 2,000 words per section. Retention style. Open with a mini hook or provocative question. Escalate tension through emotional contrasts, contradictions, withheld information, narrative turns. Balance short, punchy lines with slower storytelling. Ask direct audience questions. Always end on a cliffhanger. Process. If the section has not reached 2,000 words, stop and wait for GO. When a section is complete, clearly state that it's finished. Style. Conversational. Dramatic but controlled. Long-form YouTube investigative news tone. No fluff. No bolding. Human authenticity requirement. The writing must feel unmistakably human-written. Avoid symmetrical sentence patterns, formulaic transitions, or overly polished academic cadence. Use natural hesitation, subtle reframing, uneven pacing, and occasional unfinished thoughts. Allow controlled ambiguity, reflection, and restraint. The tone should resemble a seasoned journalist thinking out loud, not an AI delivering a script. Write as if the narrator is processing the information in real time, choosing words carefully, occasionally pulling back, and letting implications linger rather than explaining everything. Understood. I'm ready. Whenever you type go, I will immediately continue with Chapter 1, picking up directly from the last cliffhanger, maintaining momentum, and delivering a minimum 2,000-word section exactly as specified. I won't recap. I won't reset the tone. I'll stay inside the story as it's unfolding. So let's go back. Not to explain, not to justify, just to understand the sequence before everything splintered. Because before there was a jail cell, before there were charges, before anyone was talking about inmate violence or failures of protection, there was a house. A very expensive house. Quiet. Gated. The kind of place people associate with safety by default. And that assumption, safety, is where this story begins to unravel. The night Reiner and Michelle were found dead did not announce itself as extraordinary. No alarms blaring across the neighborhood. No frantic neighbors calling in suspicious activity. By all accounts, it was a calm Sunday evening in Brentwood. The kind that passes without leaving a mark. Until it didn't. The discovery of the bodies came from inside the family. That matters. It always does. Reports say it was their daughter, Romy Reiner, who found them. 27 years old. Walking into a scene no one ever expects to face inside their childhood home. There are moments like that, moments so abrupt they fracture time. Everything before feels irrelevant. Everything after becomes distorted. And according to those same reports, Romy didn't just discover the bodies. She spoke. Immediately. Clearly. She allegedly told police there was a dangerous family member. Someone who should be considered a suspect. Pause there. Because that is not a casual statement. It's not something said lightly. It's not what people say when they're confused or in shock and grasping for explanations. It suggests fear that existed before the police arrived, before evidence was cataloged, before conclusions were drawn. Ask yourself this. How often does a family member identify potential danger from within their own family, unprompted? Not often. And yet, within hours, Nick Reiner, the couple's son, was arrested. He had been living on the property, in the guest house. Separate, but close enough to matter. Close enough to collapse distance as an alibi. That proximity became the spine of the case almost immediately. Living on the property. On-site access. No forced entry reported. No unknown intruder rushing through the narrative. It's the kind of situation investigators are trained to focus on early. And sometimes, that focus becomes gravity. Everything else bends toward it. Nick was taken into custody that night. Charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The most severe charge available. A charge that doesn't just accuse, it defines. From that moment on, Nick Reiner was no longer just a son. He was the accused. A label that sticks. A label that follows you into every room, including the ones with steel doors and surveillance cameras. But here's where things get complicated and uncomfortable. The speed with which the case appeared to coalesce is striking. Not necessarily wrong, just fast. 2 victims. 1 suspect. Immediate arrest. Charges filed. Clean lines. Too clean, some would argue. That doesn't mean the charge was incorrect. It means the story, at that stage, was incomplete. And it still is. We don't know what conversations happened inside that house before the violence. We don't know what tensions existed or didn't. We don't know whether there were arguments, threats, silence, or distance stretching back years. And now, because Nick Reiner is dead, we may never know. But on that first night, the system moved decisively. As it's designed to do. Nick was processed. His name entered into databases. His charges recorded. His face, almost immediately, became recognizable. And recognition inside the criminal justice system is a double-edged thing. Because the more visible a case is, the more vulnerable the accused becomes once they cross into custody. That's not a moral judgment. It's a logistical reality. High-profile cases travel. Word spreads. Charges like parricide, the killing of one's own parents, carry a specific weight inside correctional facilities. It's one of the few crimes that can provoke intense reactions even among inmates. Again, this is not speculation. It's well documented. Which brings us back to that first night. The choices made then. The pathways set in motion. Nick Reiner wasn't just arrested. He was placed somewhere. Assigned housing, processed by staff who had to assess risk in a compressed time frame. And here's the question that refuses to stay quiet. Was that risk assessment enough? We don't yet know where Nick was housed initially. We don't know whether protective custody was considered or implemented. We don't know whether any warnings, internal or external, were raised. But we do know this. He was alive after his arrest. And he was not alive long after. That temporal gap is the space where this story lives now. Because the original crime scene, the Brentwood